Okay, so we just watched Stalker, 1979, classic Andrei Tarkovsky picture. I think it's a masterpiece of dignity, of integrity, and just one that leaves you floored, stunned, much like his other pictures, somewhat mentally exhausted because of the exercises he puts you through on an intellectual level while watching his film. And I watched it with my two friends, Joey and Craig. And we're just going to try to discuss it, try to piece apart this film. And we're fully aware that Tarkovsky, while he does use symbolism, while he does use critical framing and symmetrical metaphors, he's mostly an intuitive filmmaker, meaning that you pull the strands of meaning from it intuitively through feeling, through what you feel, than by what your intellect can digest for you. So I want to get the initial responses from my friends first, as I do on all of these. And I'm going to start with Joey. What was your initial response to the movie?
Desire is suffering.
Yeah, I would completely agree with that. Craig, what was your initial response?
My initial response? I don't even know where to start, to be honest. Like, I hate to say that I feel a little lost for words, but in a sense, I guess, like, I feel that's the proper response in a way.
I wouldn't disagree. Yeah, a lot about Tarkovsky leaves you lost in your own thoughts, with things you can't exactly articulate, but you can certainly feel, which goes back to the intuitive power of his films as well.
Yeah, like when we were watching the film and I was pointing out how any other film would likely change the camera angle or change the focus of the shot to allow you to see what is being done or what's being seen or what's making noise. And his films don't do it. And I think it's like you said, it's because he wants the true, I guess, if you want to call it fear.
Right.
Like, he wants everything to come from you, not from the film.
Exactly.
The film is there to bring out what's in you. And I think that's why no names were given and everything was so vague. Because he was basically giving us icons for us to impose our own meaning on top of. You know, like the writer, the professor, the stalker, which we've been trying to figure out why this guy would even be called Stalker, and I think if we were to go around, we might all have a different reason as to why that is.
Oh, really? Did you want to do that? Why do you think he was called the Stalker?
I think he was called a stalker because a stalker is someone, like, I had Joey look up the definition so I could, like, piece it together for myself. But the definition is someone who hunts in silence or silently, and I feel like that is what that guy was doing. It's almost like he was seeking truth in a way, but at the same time he seemed so afraid of it, and that's why he was stalking it instead of approaching it, if that makes any sense.
Well, I feel like it's a lot like the Zone. Like, the Zone is a place that exists just on the fringes of civilization or society, and I believe that the Stalker is a human being who lives in much the same way, who has a lingering presence, like a specter over it. I believe that he stalks. He stalks meaning and stalks all this. I think I actually made it clear there. Joey, did you have an idea of why it was called Stalker?
It's funny because when you think of Stalker in the sense that he's presented in the film, it's not so much like he's stalking a person, but like he's stalking some kind of feeling that he's going after.
Yeah. Precisely. And I didn't want to gloss over Joey's initial impressions. Just to wax philosophical, do you think you could have desire without suffering?
I'm not sure, because I guess if you're desiring something, then that means you're in want of it. you're missing that thing that would fulfill you, and that's why you're desiring it.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess in just the sense of breaking down words, yeah. Because if you're having a desire for something, it's usually because it's lacking. But
also, let's branch from there to the desires of our... Actually, let's do the four of them. Let's do the stalker, the professor, the writer, and the stalker's wife. They all seem to desire something. Let's begin with the stalker himself, the titular eponymous main character. What was he desiring?
it's interesting because it seems like he was mostly just wanting to have purpose. And he was pretty much saying that the only thing that gets him by in life is being able to take people to the zone. But then you get there, and what is actually happening for these people? Did he find what he was looking for when he got there?
Monkey. His daughter, his weird... I don't want to say weird. I meant like the peculiar symbol of his daughter, which is a crippled girl who was born of the zone, who has I hate to have to say spoilers when you click on a video that says discussing and analyzing a film. I hope we're beyond that. So just the end of the movie is her using her telepathy to move glasses on top of a table. And I see her as the ultimate manifestation of his deepest desires. And I remember when he was saying, and he was so hurt and so full of pain, trying to say, like, you don't go in there and just wish for your brother to come back to life. It goes to your deepest desires. Or the professor was explaining that to him. The stalker already knew this. He was just relaying the obvious. So he might have gone in there and wished for, like, a child for him and his wife. But what he wanted most was something that... He wanted the zone in human form, almost. Or he wanted something that always needed his help or his guidance, his stalkering, or whatever. But she's more special than anyone. She actually has power from the zone. It's going to take a little bit more to unpack that, and we will later when we talk about what the daughter means. Right now we're just focused on their desires, and I think his desire has something integrally to do with Monkey, and I don't disagree with your points at all. I think that's on top of it. And I think he's haunted by the fact that desire didn't fulfill any of his suffering, even though it should. And what about you, Craig? What do you think the stalker's desires were?
I don't know if I really have much more to add on to what you guys have just said. I mean, it just seems so clear that that's exactly what it was. I didn't really make the correlation, or I didn't make the connection with his daughter and all that. But I did feel like he kind of said it himself anyways, was like the reason he brings people there is because he believes that he can help them when he feels as if he can't help himself.
Yeah.
But
and you think a man who could wish anything would wish for his daughter to have legs, or like the privilege of speaking, the privilege of language.
Yeah.
But there's an inner magic to her because she was born of the zone, and that's going to be a whole nother topic. But why don't you start off then with let's go to the writer next.
Oh yeah.
What do you think the writer's
actually have a
desires were?
I actually have a note about the writer, and when they're in that room full of sand, he drops the stone into that well, and it goes and goes and goes and goes. It's like, it feels like forever, but it was maybe 10 seconds in the film before you finally hear the stone hit the bottom of this well. And then he just goes on this spiel about how he believed that his writing was going to do so much for people, but at the end of the day, if he died, they would just find someone else to consume. And he was talking about the reason he wanted to be a writer was essentially to leave his footprint.
Yeah.
Because and it's shown very well when he the guy says early on in the film that he was like, if my books aren't being read 100 years from now, then what's the point? And then after they reach that room full of sand, the guy says, "You did it. You'll live to be 100." And then he looks at the camera. The writer looks at the camera and says, "Why not forever?" And then he turns around and walks away. And then the camera pans down to his foot mark or his footprint in the sand. And I thought that was brilliant.
Yeah. Humans are so self-indulgent that we don't recognize the traces that we leave in nature. Which Tarkovsky was obsessed with nature, with the juxtaposition of man and nature. It's almost an absurdist relationship of meaningful creatures in a meaningless environment, or vice versa. It could be the opposite. Joey, what did you think of the writer's desires?
Yeah, I would have to say that was a pretty succinct summary.
We keep doing this.
Well,
We're all on the same wavelength. That's a good sign.
Yeah, I'm trying to think, because yeah, it definitely seemed like he. I don't know. I guess you could point out that each person traveling there was like looking for some sense of purpose. Mm-hmm. Really.
Yeah.
And I do want to point out that the writer was played by, must have been one of Tarkovsky's favorite actors, since he appeared in both Andrei Rublev and Solaris, and his name was Anatoly Solonitsyn, I hope is how you say his name. He's a fantastic actor, and I really liked his turn in this film as the writer, because he essentially took on the role of Snout from Solaris, whereas his role in Solaris as Sartorius was much more logical. This writer is far more nihilistic. He's far more absurdist. He's the cynical voice of the film, by far. And I guess I'll start with what I think the professor's ambitions were, or professor's desires were. The writer tends to think it's a Nobel Prize, but obviously he wanted to blow up the place. And maybe then he'd actually get a Nobel Peace Prize for blowing up a thing that scares everyone, that petrifies everyone. The writer's desires were to die. He was the most suicidal out of all three.
I think it's a little more than that. I think he wanted to die knowing that he would have left an impact.
Well, yeah, but that goes back to human beings not realizing that they leave impacts when they do.
Yeah.
The writer was also the symbol of humiliation or emasculation as well. We see him being humiliated by his boss, who had slept with his wife 20 years later, and that was his ultimate fuck you, and he still didn't have the last laugh. He was the most humiliated character, and I would call him, outside of the Stalker, well, I guess then just comparatively to the writer, the most unhappy. Would you have any feelings on the professor, you guys?
I would say that the professor was the one that left me a little bit confused out of all of the characters. His desire, I guess, wasn't very clear to me, outside of maybe just that phone call where he was like, aha, I've got you now. Like, I feel like there was probably more to it than that, but I didn't really catch on.
Did you feel anything?
I'm just wondering if that phone call...
Was it real?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was pretty funny.
It was really weird.
I love that they all answered it, and then they hung up, and they were like, oh, wait, what?
Yeah.
What is weird about this place? And before we go on to that, the Stalker's wife, she would love to go there again with him. Do you think I have no desires? What do you think her desires are? We weren't shown a whole lot of her, but she spoke to us directly to the camera, so we actually spent the most intimacy with her, because she kept eye contact with us the entire time at the end.
Well,
with her monologue, yeah.
Yeah, with her monologue.
she seemed to just want him to be happy, more or less. Like,
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree.
It seemed like she didn't want to go there simply to go there. She wanted to go there to continuously give him hope.
Exactly, hope and faith.
Yeah, and which those words are insanely important for this entire film, hope and faith.
It's interesting because the stalker was mentioning that he wanted to just live in the zone with his wife and daughter. And then the film goes to them being back at the bar and his wife greeting him there, and then she's talking about let's go. And then from then the movie kind of transitions back and forth between the sepia tone that
Exactly.
the movie began with and then the full color of when they were in the zone.
Mm-hmm. But it would go to the full color when it started with a close-up on Monkey's face, meaning that she is of the zone. She brings color to that world.
I almost really want to go into that right now.
Go into it then.
Okay, so like the whole full color and sepia thing, it seems as if, well, okay, so the whole scene where they're on the cart, and that scene felt like it lasts for like 5 minutes. It was really, really long, really exhausting.
But I said it was reflected at least by the writer who fell asleep during that scene. So even Tarkovsky is aware of his own tedium.
No, and as much as that scene did kind of bother me, I also highly respect it for what it was doing.
Yeah.
We were traveling basically into an entirely new realm, and we had to have that transition. I don't know how else it could have been done because it wouldn't have had that impact.
And that's a signature pacing technique by Tarkovsky. I instantly compare it to, in my mind, traveling from Earth to space in Solaris, which is Burton driving in his car for probably the same amount of time. And then it's not even a huge thing when you arrive there. I really did like let's talk about the pacing really quick. A Tarkovsky film is usually paced it's in two different ways. It could be unforgiving, but also in those unforgiving, very long and patient scenes, there's a lot of intellectual and intuitive rewards to be found there. He allows you to meditate over situations rather than move past them. He allows your mind to consider every avenue, symbolic value, everything that a single frame has to offer. So while it's unforgiving, I think it's incredibly rewarding in a way that most filmmakers are afraid to make a film. And what did you think of the pacing of the film?
Well, like you were saying, it is very meditative, but the word I just used earlier, what was it? I guess we could just say self-reflective. It allows you...
Introspective?
Yeah, introspective. It's very introspective because instead of just analyzing the film, it gives you so much time that you almost have to analyze yourself in relation to the film.
You gotta go with bizarre psychoanalysis.
It's pretty amazing that if you allow this film to consume you, it will. But
Tarkovsky guides you along. It's really like guided meditation too, because he guides you along with like really interesting images that aren't too overt in their symbolism, but just symbolic, just powerful enough, just dignified enough to be to set off triggers in your brain, and uses the music just sparingly enough. Everything is just enough, and the complicated subject matter that they pontificate over, just enough to guide you into where he kind of wants your brain, but it's not about control for him, because he wants you to have the freedom, but be within the right mental framework.
Yep. It's kind of like a lighting... Oh, man. I don't know how to word this. I feel like this is a good way to word it, but I don't know if it's going to get it across, because I like to speak in metaphors for things that I don't know how to say practically. It's kind of like lighting an unscented candle. I don't know if that makes sense to anyone else.
But telling someone to like imagine like a forest, like
no, like
Well, it's funny. They mentioned in the movie that the flowers in
Unscented,
bloom had
yeah.
no scent.
oh wow, yeah. So no, that my idea was like, you know, usually you light a scented candle to set a specific mood, but it's like he's lighting an unscented candle, and you're left to imagine this.
exactly. I love it because most directors are so authoritative, so dictatorial in their approach. And whereas I tell you, like, all of these masters, you know, are Bergmans, Antonionis, and Fellinis, Kubricks, they don't allow for accidents. But I think Tarkovsky allows for kind of accidents. Like, if the sun is shining in a certain way, I think he would have completely redone a scene so that they filmed it where the sun was just shining in that certain way.
Mm-hmm.
I think he leaves a lot to nature, because once again, this is a science fiction film that's incredibly earthy, watery, it's elemental.
There actually was a scene in the movie where sun glare affected the camera for no reason, and
I'm sure they noticed that, and that's why they framed it right at that spot.
Well, it happened in a moment where I actually thought that it was going to hold meaning, but then I couldn't give it any meaning afterwards. So it was almost just like...
Well, to those who are willing to go along with Tarkovsky, I think he lays out tons of threads of meaning to his mosaic of overall importance and philosophy. But you have to be willing to follow a certain string to the end. And did anyone have any overall theories about what the film might have been trying to express?
Yeah.
Want to go first?
I felt like the movie was about losing faith or hope of some sort. Like I feel like there's probably a lot of people out there who, when they watch this movie, they'd probably have a similar theory to mine, but they would immediately give it like a religious tone, and
They wouldn't be like wrong.
You wouldn't be wrong, but I feel like that's looking at an example as opposed to the actual meaning, because there was a lot of religious examples in the movie, but I felt like the religious examples were more...
They were ironic to me. They were more cynical, because the most striking one was the writer wearing the crown of thorns and saying something nihilistic.
Yeah,
but it was to drive that dagger deeper into the stalker's chest.
Yeah, I didn't really feel like religion was being attacked so much as being used as a tool to push the true meaning of the movie forward, I guess. Mm-hmm. Or at least the meaning that I got out of it. And I feel like it is losing faith, and one of the biggest examples of losing faith is losing your religious faith.
Yes. Which the zone is the stalker's religion. Yeah.
And that brings me to this little note that I had to write again. I wrote at one point in the film, because they have the writer go down this long hallway, and they're staying far, far behind, but just enough to where they can watch him. And he's so hesitant to continue going down this hall, but there's no other way to go. It was really cool. And then he gets to this doorway, and he says he doesn't want to go. But then they tell him that he has to go. And he pulls out a weapon.
Yeah, a
gun, and he goes to load it, and he says that you can't go in there. Who do you even think you're going to shoot? If you go in there, you'll be punished. So I wrote down, you must go in unarmed and submerge yourself, because immediately after he throws his gun off to the side, and immediately as he goes into this room, it's full of water, and he has to go almost to the point where his chin's touching the water. He goes through that and then climbs another set of stairs.
That was a great, tense scene.
Forward. So it's like you can't just simply go in here. You have to immerse yourself in this unwanted truth. That's what I felt like the movie was trying to do this whole time. And there was another scene where the guy forgets his bag and he wants to go back. And he says, you can never go back the way you came. And that's how it feels when you lose your faith, is you can't regain your faith. You'll never have it back. You can pretend, but you won't be where you were. You'll never get back there. Mm-hmm. So that's why I feel like the entire movie is about losing faith, because there's so many things just yelling it at me. It was so good.
And scenes like that perfectly demonstrate the tension between the earthy and the unexplained. And a lot of times during those scenes, Tarkovsky circumvents subjectivity, meaning he'll show you a perspective from within a room that they haven't entered yet. Or he plays with your subjectivity quite nicely, quite cerebrally, to where you have to fill in the dots, especially in scenes like those. I don't know if I necessarily have an overarching theory of what the film is about. I think it's about a lot of different things because it works on a lot of different levels. But one of the levels I think it does work profoundly on is a commentary on art and on artists. Especially in a lot of the scenes that do break the fourth wall, where they are looking straight at you. The writer is basically chastising you as an audience member. I believe that the writer and the professor might symbolize, as I said, the intelligentsia, or the critics, the journalists, the people who are there to tear apart Tarkovsky, if I'll make him be the stalker in this scenario. I think Tarkovsky made films that made you want to believe or want to have faith, but they're being torn apart. They could be praised, but they're praised for their coldness or intellectuality than what I think he wanted, which was for their warmth and their intuition and their devotion to faith. And I think that the stalker is caught in the middle, and he's trying to lead them to an ultimate meaning. Like Tarkovsky is trying to lead us to an ultimate meaning. But even Tarkovsky doesn't think that it's there, because you have to believe that it's there for it to be there.
Now that you mention it, it's almost as if the movie's not exactly about desires, it's more about belief, because if you think about it, you could really break down all the characters into what they went in believing. Because the artist goes on a rant about how he was like, your machines, they make everything so much easier to do and easier to consume. And he was like, but life is, the meaning of life is to, produce art, because art helps so many people. And then the guy's like, you think it helps people? Well, people starve every single day. And it was almost like an immediate slap to the face, and his belief was that this guy put so eloquently how art is this amazing thing, and then this other guy's just like, oh, well, here's the reality of things. People die every day.
Well, it might have been eloquent, but it was ostentatious. Let's get Joey in on this. What do you think?
What's the question?
Do you think that there's like an overarching meaning to the film?
Or at least what you took out of it?
Yeah, I would still have to say, like, there's definitely it definitely is dealing with desire, and I'm still contemplating what it was exactly the stalker was going for, like, by entering there.
I think he was a fascinating guy, yeah.
Yeah, perhaps, like, I feel like one of the things he was probably hoping for was something to fix his daughter, who was crippled.
I think that's what the audience is supposed to think, like, why doesn't he go in there? And
yeah, and because it's interesting, because I'm wondering, at one point, did the daughter gain these psychic abilities, and if it had to do with the last time that he was in the zone.
That's what I think.
But it's interesting, because I'm not quite ready to say, I guess, like, what I think the meaning of the film was, because I'm still trying to, like, pick it apart.
I think it is impossible, yeah.
One thing that was a recurring theme was the train. There's the train at the very beginning when it zooms in on the little coffee table or bedside table.
That's another thing that's weird, though.
And the cup starts to move because of...
You heard that?
Yeah.
Yeah,
because
of music in the background.
And there's the train, it's like shaking the room.
Did the cup move before the train?
It was just shaking. It was like, and then you're not really sure why it was shaking.
But it was a jovial moment when the train came, because in the background, they're playing, I forgot the composer's name, but it was a song of triumph and faith.
Yeah, the joyful, we adore thee.
That was it, obviously. But obviously a song of triumph and faith.
Yeah.
That was Tarkovsky's little champion.
And then the train happens again when they're, I think they're inside the room, and then there's like a brief moment where it pans out, and then the color changes a little bit to the sepia tone while they're inside the room, and then it happens again at the end of the movie with the daughter after she moves the glass.
I got 2 points I want to bounce off of that. First of all, I love that you went back to the daughter, because I think it would be impossible to talk about the overall meaning of the film without talking about her. Once again, I feel like she is integral to the film. I think that she is the key to the film, the heart of the film, which is why Tarkovsky ends on her in a triumphant way, but in a way that's not that does not contradict the language that he set up earlier, because it is still downcast, but it's a glimmer of hope, a glimmer of the unexplained, something you can't explain away in the film. Finally, is her. But the second thing is also brings me back to the self-referential nature of the film, because once the stalker himself starts talking about how music is beautiful, how it's a bunch of empty noises that penetrate our soul, the music becomes sparse to the point of I don't remember if there was any after that.
Yeah, I mean, that's
there might have been, but it was used much less.
And there's definitely some pretty overt symbols dealing with faith and belief throughout the film as well. One that was like standing out the most, I believe it was the writer put on what looked to be a crown of thorns.
Yeah.
Well, a more less symbolic and more practical use of faith in the movie was all these so-called traps. The stalker kept talking about these traps and how everything changes every minute, and you never know. He says, which is pretty beautiful, because I can't really deconstruct what they were trying to say with this, but he was saying that I don't know what happens here when humans aren't around, but when humans come around, everything changes so fast, or something like that. He said it something like that. And he was talking about he made everyone else go before him, but he made sure that everyone walked in the same exact path. It's because he had so much faith that something bad was going to happen. But what's so beautiful about the film that wouldn't happen in any other film, I feel like, was they tested these traps over and over and over again, and nothing bad ever
nothing
happened.
Truly and unutterably unexplainable happened, except for that very end scene.
Yeah. So
there is an ounce of unexplainable magic. You can't intellectualize the ending of the film away, and I think that's where Tarkovsky won.
Yeah.
So that's, I think Joey's spot on, and going to Monkey, his daughter, I feel weird calling her Monkey, but Tarkovsky wants us to, as the center of meaning. She is the center of the film. For me, she has to be the meaning, and she is the faith. She's the finalization of that faith. She is unequivocally magical. Mm-hmm. We can't just say we believe she moved them. She moved them.
Okay,
she moved the glasses.
Let's just go with this. I might sound like a complete idiot, but it just kind of clicked with me. The fact that her name is Monkey, the fact that she's lame and mute. I think she was the representation of humans not having an impact.
I can't follow that one.
Because, think about it. Monkeys, if you think about a human in a derogatory way, we would think of ourselves as nothing more than monkeys. And
or she could be human in its purest form.
Yeah,
human in its most in its purest form, most. Removed from the intelligentsia, most removed from intellectualism, is faith.
Okay.
So humans at their purest is Monkey, is the magical. I think you and I cracked that open together. I took what you were saying and I springboarded off of it.
Yeah, I'm kind of forgetting where I was going. But yeah,
what do you think?
Well, that's what I was saying. At the end of the movie, it was showing that there is still something to have faith in, even though all these three men go on this long journey with you and give you nothing to believe in, and then at the end of the movie, they just throw magic at you at the last fucking second.
Yeah, they throw the otherworldly.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because I was thinking of just the term monkey as far as like the animal monkey and how it's symbolic in art. One example that immediately comes to mind is Frida Kahlo used monkeys a lot in her paintings, and they were symbols of magic and also familial protection.
Wow.
As well as like monkeys as a symbol in general, whether it's like the zodiac or anything like that, they're usually associated with energy and activity and things like that, which is interesting, as Craig pointed out, that she was lame and she never really spoke, and she seemed the opposite of like lighthearted or energetic. She seemed very solemn whenever it would pan on her face. So I think like both sides of that related to her pretty well.
This is how good Tarkovsky is. Just off of the meaning, the symbolic value of a person's name, we have 3 different interpretations of it.
Mm-hmm.
That's where he gets magical. And none of us, we can all argue all of our points on that one. That's perfect. That's perfect. Let me ask another question here. General composition. Craig, this was your first Tarkovsky film. What did you think of his poetic language? What did you think of the way he composed a scene or his entire film? What makes him unique?
I feel like I say this a bit. Maybe I don't. I don't know. But I really love a director who can take the scenery or what's the word I'm looking for? Like the place it's shot.
The setting?
The setting. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Setting. Any director who could take the setting and make it a character in the movie is fantastic. Like, or a character in the scene. It's like you were never not aware of the surroundings, and the surroundings were so bleak and wet. Wet is a very big part of this movie. Everything is so wet, and I would love to understand why that is. There's so much water.
It's actually funny because they even make like almost a self-referential joke about it in the movie, where I think it was either the writer or the professor. I think it was the writer, when he mentions to the stalker like, this is the dry tunnel.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we just joke about that. You don't really have to swim.
And I mean, I know for me, above most people, but I think it's true of everyone, is like, these guys were constantly getting wet, and that's very uncomfortable. No, I mean, it sounds like I'm not actually saying anything.
I thought you were about to say something like pretty profound, and you're like, those dudes were just damp as fuck.
No, that's what I'm saying, is like they were constantly... Well, like I said, you have to submerge yourself, and they're constantly wet in this movie. It's like they're constantly uncomfortable about this truth that they're traveling through.
I mean, it's funny because if you want to talk about like the religious symbolism,
they're being baptized the entire time.
like literally, like that's what it made me think of, like when they had the little cross, the little stairwell.
The process of baptism.
I love how in all these videos I always say something that sounds so basic, but I mean so much with it.
We extrapolate so much from it.
But I actually noticed a lot of parallels with this movie and Solaris.
Yeah.
Quite a few. And talking about like the imagery in the water, both films would spend a lot of time just on close-ups of water. Solaris did that too, and it was like, I don't know, it was like to just on a...
Stylistically, I would call it super similar to Solaris. It's a known fact that Solaris is one of my favorite films, and it's my favorite Tarkovsky film, but I think that Stalker is also fucking fantastic. The only way... I would also call it the antithesis, or like the anti-Solaris as well, because Solaris is on paper, it's principally about the idealized form, about not being able to help your desires coming into the real world. Stalker is about a group of men who end up refusing to summon their desires, to conjure them up. They're both about desires or idealized forms, but one shows us every idealized form, and the other shows us none of them.
And it's also interesting because it seemed like Solaris was about like having to confront and get rid of them.
Exactly. This one was about just basically admitting that you have them in the first place, and then what that entails philosophically and emotionally.
Yeah, I love how he was like, I don't want to take the filth of my soul and dump it on everyone's head. It was really, like, there's so much cool stuff about this movie. It was really neat.
When you were mentioning poetic language, it was funny you use that term because like there were so many literal poems used throughout the movie. Like at the point where the stalker was reciting a poem and like he just like kind of broke out into it, and it was weird because it was almost like he was singing it.
Yeah.
It had a tune, and then when it cuts to,
it's as if he's trying to reinforce it in his head every time he says it too, like a mantra.
And then there's the scene where it's panning across the water, and I'm assuming it was the stalker's wife's voice who was reading a passage from the book of Revelation, actually about basically the end of the world and Judgment Day.
And I would use very specific language when talking about this film's grammar. You know, like instead of motif, I would use stanza. Like I would use the language of poetry instead of instead of rhythmic, I would use lyrical. Like I would use, it's something very that might sound like very arbitrary of a difference, but I think it's very important to understanding his true power.
Like, throughout the movie, you kept saying that when the stalker was saying all these things, he would often stutter and his voice would break.
Yeah.
And you were saying it's as if he's trying to convince himself of what he's saying.
Yeah, that's what I was saying, is trying to reinforce all of these things.
Yeah.
Because it's like he was talking about the poem that he said, it was obvious that he had said it 1,000 times. He had rehearsed it because it had a meter to it. Oh God, it was very powerful. That stalker was a very powerful character. I related to him a little too much. I can't tell who's more damaged, though, him or Chris Kelvin, but both very damaged people. Probably Chris Kelvin.
What about at the end of the movie when he crawls into bed? I thought that was really good. Like it's almost like he was losing his faith, but blaming it on other people.
And his wife was so good to him.
Yeah,
it was weird because it was like showing him like visibly weakening or something.
Yeah, and I like that you brought up, Joey brought up, in the first moments of the film, the wife is crying and writhing on the floor in a way that reminded both of us of, I guess, the way that Andrei Tarkovsky likes to frame like women in moments of peril or distress, which is that you see their body through their shirt. He makes it psychosexual, or like he makes it confronting in a strangely erotic way. Women in peril, because if you compare that scene to the scene in Solaris where Hari is resurrecting, it is the same thing, or at least it's obviously by the same conductor, which is fascinating. That's a fascinating motif to have, or a fascinating reoccurring element to put in your films. I'm glad you pointed it out because that went above my head for a second. But this film is striking and pretty incredible, and it was his last Soviet picture he made before his exile, which people argue whether or not it's self-imposed, whether or not he blew up the importance or the severity of his exile. But it was a fantastic film. Tarkovsky's a genius, and like Stalker is like top 15 quality film. If not eventually top 10, but it's a difficult film to revisit because it really challenges you. It really makes you think about certain intellectual questions that maybe you've never thought in such such an organic way. Yeah, it's a very organic science fiction film.
Yeah, I feel like challenging is more accurate to this film than all the other films that you say are challenging. Because when you say challenging, you mean something specific. But in this film, challenging is just a great word because that's exactly what.
Well, it's challenging on every level. Like whereas I may call Bergman challenging, like conceptually, his films are normally visually very exciting, and like he does do like really bizarro or like shocking moments in his films, or like very vivid moments. Tarkovsky is challenging every which way you look at him, because visually and thematically he's unforgiving, conceptually he's incredibly complicated, and emotionally he's incredibly visceral.
Yeah, and then not in the sense that you're displeased or anything like that, but these movies, like, or this movie at least, I haven't seen any others, so I can't exactly say, but I can assume, are hard to watch.
I think outside of his first Ivan's Childhood, he was very patient, very unforgiving.
Yeah, and it's like, I mean hard as in like difficulty. Like it's difficult to watch simply because he's not going to hold your hand while simultaneously giving you so much to consume.
Ivan's Childhood, his first film, was comparatively fast moving, but I think that's because he hadn't completely honed his craft yet. He hadn't completely cultivated the poetic landscape of his filmic language, and Tarkovsky's a genius. So when I call him unforgiving, I mean that in the best possible way. I think that filmmakers, there needs to be an unforgiving artist, an unforgiving filmmaker, a film that doesn't hold its punches, that believes in itself, that is so dignified that it never compromises anything about its self-worth. And there was other symbolism in there. Joey picked up a lot on
The Black Dog.
The Black Dog, yeah.
Yeah, it was interesting because I'm assuming we were introduced to the dog before we even saw him.
In Sepia, really. It was the first time.
Mm-hmm. Well,
during the scene where the stalker was like lying in the puddle or some shit. We saw the Sepia dog for some reason.
Even before then, we heard
the howling. You're right,
dog howling in the distance, and then someone was asking if someone lived here.
Yeah, it was really weird. I was like, because I'm sorry, I want to go off that real quick, just because Zach did, like, I knew nothing about this movie other than the fact that it was called The Stalker, and that Zach had told me that it's science fiction. So when they basically break into this place and hear what sounds to me like a dog or a wolf, and then they say, "Is someone living here?" I was like, okay, so some crazy shit's going to go down. Which makes the rest of the movie so much better for me because nothing went down. Which was fantastic. Because it's like I had so much belief going into the film, and then it was all ripped away from me. So go ahead, Joey, though. I'm sorry.
Just like the actual characters of the movie.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. They went in
their dynamics were
thinking there was so much.
There is a little bit of a payoff with that because you do see the scene with the two corpses laying with each other, and the dog is with them.
Oh yeah.
So obviously there were other people there at some point, and I guess there was something to the traps because these people were there and they died and they never left.
And what is the dog symbolic of?
It was interesting because when I first saw it, immediately I was thinking like death. Usually like a black dog appearing like that is usually like an omen of like death. I know also it's can be used as a phrase to refer to depression.
Yeah.
Like a black dog, and when people are referring to like a cloud of depression. And then there's also mythologies where a black dog appearing like an apparition is actually a companion or a protector of travelers.
Wow. Yeah, I like that one a lot.
And it's interesting because, we're thinking of the dog as like a product of the zone and only existing there. But then you see the dog appear in the sepia tone while Stalker is laying
Mm-hmm.
down in the zone, and then you later see the dog has returned with them from the zone back to, his home.
Yeah.
I feel like most of that
Awesome.
rhymed, but
I don't think it did. Zone and home.
There are a couple
close
things.
enough.
So like those two people lying there with each other, the two dead skeletons, they were almost embracing each other and staring each other in the eyes. It's like they died still believing in this place. That's what it felt like to me, is like they stayed there.
Right.
They wanted to be there, and they died with hope. And that's the only time you actually see the dog cry, which seems important.
You actually hear it cry again later. At the very end of the movie, the last time you physically see the dog is when he's laying by Stalker, who's like crawling into bed, appearing weak.
Yeah.
And then it cuts to Monkey, and while she's like laying there with her head on the table, you hear the dog crying in the background.
Yeah, after she moved the cups, that's true.
And then the train and the jovial music. It's all of his sound motifs coming together at once.
And I'm wondering, if the Stalker ended up actually meeting the same fate as the two skeletons that we saw in the zone.
It's almost as if not losing your fate was death, which is kind of counterintuitive.
Well, it's funny because he actually talked about life and death pretty straightforwardly, and he was saying life is malleable and it grows, it's flexible, and then death is hard
and strong.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, because that could go with faith too, is that if you're set in stone in your faith, you might as well be dead. I don't know. I mean, that's where that's what I'm getting from the film, so I'm going to relate everything back to it.
That's the thing. Tarkovsky would tell you that you're right. So long as you're intuitively pulling it based on emotion, based on what you were picking up from what he was capturing on film.
Yeah, and I felt like there was something else I wanted to bring up, but I can't remember now.
Is there any closing thoughts?
Oh, something else about the dog was I kind of wanted to get you all's idea on this. What was so important about him bringing the dog home and telling his wife, don't scare it away? Like, he felt like she was going to get rid of the dog, but he wanted to keep it.
I think his faith was holding on by a thread at that point.
Yeah, and then the dog was, like, protecting them when they were on their way home. Like, it was, surrounding them and looking out for things.
I certainly think it was a symbol of protecting for the stalker, for the traveler.
Yeah.
It's pretty interesting that there are all these symbolisms of traveling and trying to reach a destination, and then apparently this is the movie that he last made before Exile.
Yeah,
it is funny. Very nice, very nice. Any closing thoughts, Greg?
No, I don't have any closing thoughts. I can't close it off. Like, I feel like if we allowed ourselves, we could keep talking about this movie for another hour.
My closing thoughts is that it's beautiful, that it's masterful, that it's one of Andrei Tarkovsky's best films. It's one of the best films of the 70s. And while I do prefer Solaris over it because I react... because I have a better reaction to that film's specific language and specific characters, especially the character of Hari, as played by Natalia Bondarchuk. Stalker is also a deeply moving film, almost just as beautiful as Solaris, but arguably just as philosophical and poetic. I think Stalker is one of the best films ever made. It's a great film, and people should definitely watch it. Joey, do you have any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I would have to say that this is definitely one of those movies that require more than one viewing because there's so many different layers to it.
Tarkovsky actually thinks that you should watch his movies twice before.
Yeah, I would say definitely there's so much happening that you kind of need to watch it the first time just to kind of get an overall feeling from the movie, and then go back into it watching it again kind of having that familiarity so that you can,
Yeah, you won't have
pick
your
things-
compulsory hang-ups. You won't be expecting
Right.
something that doesn't happen. You'll be more free to lose yourself in its
Mhm.
poetry.
Right. As well as having a lot more cohesive grasp on the overall narrative.
That's one thing about Tarkovsky, or about Stalker. I like the mystique of Solaris, and possibly you can argue the convoluted nature of Andrei Rublev, but Stalker is so coherent and so cohesive to me. It's a film that makes perfect sense for me in every facet, in every factor of its makeup. I understand why he did every single thing that he did. And what I understand most is that he left me with a feeling of mystery, a feeling that I can never answer. And that's the best thing that film, or a piece of intelligent film, can give you, is the magical, is the unintellectualizable, right? Something you cannot articulate, and he did that. It was amazing. And you guys enjoyed the film, right?
Yeah.
All right.
Definitely. Well, like I was saying earlier when we took our little break, I can't say that the movie was enjoyable in the sense that I got joy, but I admire this film a lot. I mean, if you can watch this film and not have a sense of admiration, then I would have to be blunt to say that you have no respect for film.
I think that's a good place to end it. If you don't at least admire this film, then you have no respect for film as a whole.
Yeah, fuck you.
Fuck you.
Go die.
All right, thanks,
Like
guys.
like the video, though.
Well, yeah, like the video, share it, subscribe. Thanks a lot, you guys.